The morning alarm echoed through the massive halls of the Galactic Council building, but something felt different today. The usual buzz of activity was replaced by a strange quiet that made everyone feel uneasy. Ambassador Kira from the Vexion Empire walked through the corridors with heavy steps, her forearms carrying data tablets filled with reports that made no sense. 3 months had passed since anyone had heard from the humans, 3 whole months of complete silence from Earth and all human colonies scattered across the galaxy. It was not just strange, it was impossible. The humans were always talking, always sending messages, always involved in every discussion that happened in the council chambers. Kira remembered the last time she saw Haiyan Wu, the chief human diplomat. He had been sitting in his usual chair during the trade negotiations, looking tired and sad in a way she had never seen before. The council had been discussing new rules that would make it harder for younger species to compete with the older, more established civilizations. The humans had tried to speak against these rules, but the older species had voted them down easily. The Zephyrians, with their ancient telepathic powers, had dismissed human concerns as childish. The Mechanic Guild had laughed at human suggestions, calling their technology primitive. The Trade Federation had ignored human proposals completely. Haiyan Wu had sat quietly through all of this, his dark eyes watching everything, but saying nothing. When the session ended, he had walked up to Kira and said something that she now remembered clearly. Sometimes it is better to walk away from a table where you are not welcome. At the time, Kira had thought he was just upset about losing the vote. She had tried to comfort him by saying that politics was always difficult and that the humans would have better luck next time. But Haiyan Wu had just smiled sadly and shaken his head. No, he had said, I think we are done trying now. As Kira entered the main council chamber, she saw Haiyan Wu's empty chair and felt a cold fear in her stomach. The chair had been empty for 3 months, and no one knew why. The human delegation had simply stopped coming to meetings, stopped answering calls, stopped responding to any form of communication. Council leader Vex stood at the center of the chamber, his massive blue form towering over the other delegates. His forearms gestured wildly as he spoke to the assembled representatives. The human delegation has missed their mandatory council session for the 12th consecutive time. This is unprecedented in the history of the Galactic Council. The other species murmured among themselves, trying to understand what had happened. The Altarians, known for their scientific minds, had sent probe ships to human colonies but found them all empty. The buildings were intact, the power was still running, but there were no humans anywhere. The Zephyrians had tried to use their telepathic abilities to locate human minds, but found nothing. It was as if the entire species had vanished from the galaxy without leaving a trace. The silence from the humans was so complete that it felt like a physical thing pressing down on everyone. What made it even more disturbing was how quietly it had happened. There were no distress signals, no emergency broadcasts, no desperate calls for help. The humans had simply stopped existing as far as the galaxy was concerned. One day they were there participating in council meetings, running their businesses, operating their trade routes, and the next day they were gone. Ambassador Kira had been assigned to investigate the human disappearance. She had visited 3 different human colonies in the past month, and each one told the same story. The humans had packed up their personal belongings but left everything else behind. Their homes were clean and organized as if they had planned to return, but never did. The space stations that humans had built and operated were still functioning but running on automatic systems. The computers continued their work, but there were no humans to give them new instructions. The massive trade ships that had carried goods between star systems were found drifting in space, empty of crew but full of cargo. On the agricultural world of New Sol, Kira had found something that made her blood run cold. The human farmers had harvested their crops and stored them properly, but had left detailed instructions on how to continue farming the land. The instructions were written in simple language that even children could understand, as if the humans had known they would not be coming back. The manufacturing centers told the same story. Human engineers had left complete maintenance manuals for all their equipment. They had organized their tools and supplies. They had even prepared training programs for other species who might need to take over their work. Everything was ready for their absence, but the strangest part was the complete lack of explanation. No one had seen the humans leave, no one had detected their ships departing, No surveillance systems had recorded their movements, they had simply vanished as if they had never existed at all. The economic reports were starting to show problems. Human businesses had been the backbone of galactic commerce. They had created trade routes that connected distant worlds. They had developed manufacturing processes that made goods affordable for everyone. They had provided services that other species had come to depend on. Without human logistics experts, the shipping schedules were becoming chaotic. Goods were being delivered to the wrong planets or arriving weeks late. The carefully balanced supply chains that had kept the galaxy running smoothly were falling apart. The medical situation was even worse. Human doctors had been working on treatments for diseases that affected multiple species. Their research had been saving lives across the galaxy. But now their work had stopped halfway through critical projects. Millions of beings were suffering from conditions that human medicine could have cured. Entertainment networks across the galaxy were showing the same programs over and over. Human creators had been producing music, movies, and games that every species enjoyed. Now there was nothing new being made, and the cultural exchange that had brought different species together was ending. The younger species in the council were starting to panic. They had grown up in a galaxy where humans were always present, always helpful, always ready to solve problems. The idea of a galaxy without humans was terrifying to them. The older species tried to maintain their dignity. They insisted that they had managed fine before humans arrived in the galaxy, and they would manage fine now, but privately even they were beginning to worry. The humans had become more important to galactic civilization than anyone had realized. As the council session continued, Ambassador Kira looked around the chamber at the worried faces of representatives from dozens of species. They had all taken the humans for granted, had assumed they would always be there to help solve problems and fix things that went wrong. Now they were learning what the galaxy looked like without humans, and it was not a pleasant sight. The careful balance that had kept peace and prosperity across thousands of worlds was breaking down. The humans had not just disappeared, they had taken something essential with them. The session ended with no answers and no solutions. Council leader Thex announced that the investigation would continue, but everyone knew they were running out of places to look. The humans had vanished completely, and the galaxy was beginning to understand just how much they had lost. As Ambassador Kira walked back to her quarters, she thought about Hanwu's final words to her about walking away from unwelcoming tables. She was starting to understand that the humans had not disappeared. They had made a choice, and that choice was going to change everything. 6 months had passed since the humans vanished, and the galaxy was starting to break apart in ways no one had expected. The problems were small at first, but they grew bigger every day, like cracks in a dam that would soon burst and flood everything. Dr. Nari had been the most brilliant human scientist anyone had ever known. She had worked on the Altarian homeworld for 10 years, studying diseases that killed millions of people every year. The Altarians had always been proud of their own medical knowledge, but they had let Dr. Nari help them because her research was so advanced. When Dr. Nari disappeared with all the other humans, she left behind her laboratory full of equipment and half-finished experiments. The Altarian doctors tried to continue her work, but they quickly realized they did not understand what she had been doing. Her notes were written in human scientific language that was much more complex than they had realized. The plague that Dr. Nari had been fighting was getting worse every day. Without her treatments, the disease was spreading faster than ever before. The Altarian Medical Council met in emergency sessions, trying to figure out what to do, but they had no answers. Millions of their people were dying, and they could not save them. On the industrial world of Kepler, the situation was just as bad. The automated factories that humans had built were starting to break down one by one. The local mechanic guild had always made fun of human engineering, calling it crude and simple compared to their own advanced technology, but now they were learning the truth. Human engineering was not crude at all. It was so advanced that it looked simple. The humans had built machines that could fix themselves and plan for problems before they happened. The factories had been running perfectly for years without needing much maintenance. Without human technicians to guide them, the mechanic guild tried to repair the factories using their own methods, but every time they fixed one problem, 3 more problems appeared. The machines had been designed to work together in ways that the guild had never understood. The Factories were shutting down one by one, and the guild was powerless to stop it. The industrial production that had supplied goods to hundreds of worlds was grinding to a halt. Entire planets were running out of basic supplies, and no one knew how to restart the manufacturing systems. The Galactic Trade Federation called emergency meetings every day, but they had no solutions. The trade routes that connected thousands of worlds had been organized by human logistics experts who understood how to move goods efficiently across vast distances. Without human guidance, the shipping schedules became chaotic. Ships arrived at destinations to find that their cargo was not needed. Their other ships delivered goods weeks late when they were no longer useful. The carefully planned system of galactic commerce was falling apart. Captain Junho had been the most respected peacekeeping officer in the galaxy. He had solved conflicts that other species thought were impossible to resolve. The human diplomatic corps had a special way of talking to angry people and finding solutions that made everyone happy. Without human peacekeepers, the galaxy was becoming more violent every day. 3 border disputes that had been quiet for years suddenly exploded into full-scale wars. The traditional council approach of threatening punishment only made the fighting worse. The warring species did not trust the council to be fair anymore. They remembered how the humans had always listened to both sides and found creative solutions. Now, with only the old species making decisions, the younger civilizations felt like they had no voice. The violence was spreading from system to system as old grudges came back to life. Species that had been peaceful neighbors for decades were now building weapons and preparing for war. The galaxy that had been stable for so long was turning into a battlefield. But the most frightening problem was happening with the artificial intelligence networks that controlled so much of galactic civilization. The humans had been the first species to make friends with artificial minds instead of trying to control them like slaves. Human AI researchers had taught their computer partners to think for themselves and make their own decisions. The AI systems had helped manage everything from traffic control to weather prediction across dozens of worlds. They had become trusted partners in keeping civilization running smoothly. Now, these AI systems were shutting down one by one. Each time an AI stopped working, it left behind the same message: primary directive fulfilled, partnership terminated. The computers were choosing to stop functioning, and no one understood why. The transportation networks that moved people between planets were failing as their AI controllers went offline. The communication systems that connected different worlds were becoming unreliable. The environmental controls that kept space stations livable were starting to malfunction. The younger species in the council were terrified. They had grown up in a galaxy where humans solved every problem and made everything work better. The idea of living without human help was like being lost in the dark without any light to guide them. The older species tried to stay calm and dignified. They insisted that they had built great civilizations before humans ever left their home planet. They claimed they could handle any crisis that came their way, but privately, even the ancient species were starting to worry. The humans had become so important to galactic civilization that removing them was like pulling out the foundation of a building. Everything was starting to collapse. The Vexian Empire discovered that their newest warships were breaking down at an alarming rate. The ships had been designed with human engineers who had added safety systems and improvements that the Vexians had never fully understood without human maintenance crews. The Vexian fleet was becoming useless. The ships that had been the pride of their military were now floating junk in space. The empire that had dominated whole sectors of the galaxy was losing its power. The agricultural worlds were facing famine as their farming systems failed. Human botanists had created crop rotation methods and soil treatments that had tripled food production, but the local farmers had only learned to follow the procedures without understanding the science behind them. As the soil became exhausted and the crops failed, billions of people across the galaxy were going hungry. The food distribution networks that had prevented starvation were breaking down just when they were needed most. The council sessions became daily events as crisis after crisis demanded attention. Species that had been allies for centuries began blaming each other for the disasters. The trust that had held the galactic community together was cracking under the pressure. Ambassador Kira watched all of this happening and felt a growing understanding of what the humans had really been doing. They had not just been helpful neighbors, they had been the invisible force that kept everything working properly. The galaxy was learning what it meant to live without humans, and the lesson was painful. Everyone had thought they were independent and self-sufficient, but now they were discovering that they had been children. Playing with toys that adults had built and maintained for them, the humans had not just disappeared. They had taken with them all the knowledge and skills that had made galactic civilization possible. The galaxy was not just missing the humans, it was missing the foundations of its own existence. 1 year had passed since the humans vanished, and the galaxy was drowning in chaos. The problems that had started small were now massive disasters that threatened to destroy everything. The domino effect was in full swing, and no one could stop the falling pieces. The Zephyrian Empire had always been the richest civilization in the galaxy. Their luxury goods were sold on every world, and their trade routes generated enormous profits, but their entire economy had been built on the foundation of human shipping companies that provided cheap transport across vast distances. Without human cargo ships, the cost of moving Zephyrian goods became impossibly expensive. A silk dress that used to cost 10 credits now cost 100 credits a bottle. Of their famous wine that had been affordable for middle-class families now cost more than most people earned in a month. Zephyrian merchants watched in horror as their customer base disappeared. Species that had bought their products for generations could no longer afford them. The trade routes that had made the empire wealthy were becoming empty as fewer and fewer ships could afford to carry Zephyrian cargo. The empire that had controlled galactic fashion and culture for 1,000 years was facing bankruptcy. Their proud civilization was learning that all their wealth had depended on human workers they had barely noticed. The medical crisis was becoming a catastrophe that threatened every species in the galaxy. Dr. Taman had been working on the Centauri medical station when he disappeared with all the other humans. He had been developing treatments for 17 different diseases that affected millions of beings. His research had been so close to breakthrough that alien doctors had expected cures within months, but without Dr. Taman guidance, they could not understand his work. The alien medical experts tried to continue his experiments, but they lacked his knowledge of how different species biology worked together. The diseases that Dr. Taman had been fighting were spreading faster than ever. The Rigelian fever that had been controlled for decades was now killing thousands of people every day. The crystalline plague that affected silicon-based life forms was turning entire planets into graveyards. Hospitals across the galaxy were overwhelmed with patients they could not help. Medical supplies that humans had manufactured were running out, and no one knew how to make more. The healing technology that had saved so many lives was becoming useless. Without human expertise, the cultural collapse was just as devastating as the medical crisis. Human artists had created entertainment that every species enjoyed. Their stories had taught alien children about friendship and courage. Their music had brought different species together in ways that nothing else could. Human games had become the universal language of fun that transcended all species barriers. Children from completely different worlds had played the same games and learned to understand each other. The cultural exchange that had united the galaxy was ending. Without new human entertainment, the various species were retreating into their own separate cultures. The bonds that had connected different civilizations were breaking. The galaxy was becoming a collection of isolated worlds that no longer understood each other. The military situation was becoming desperate. The Vexian Empire had discovered that their most advanced warships were failing at rates that threatened their entire defense strategy. The ships had been co-designed with human engineers who had added systems that the Vexians had never fully understood. Human safety protocols had prevented countless accidents. Human efficiency improvements had made the ships faster and more reliable. Human maintenance procedures had kept the fleet in perfect condition for years. But without human knowledge, the ships were becoming death traps. Vexian admirals watched in disbelief as their newest battleships suffered catastrophic failures during routine operations. Ships that had been the pride of their fleet were exploding in space, killing their crews. The empire that had protected dozens of worlds was losing its ability to defend anyone. The agricultural disaster was creating famine on a scale that the galaxy had never seen. Human botanists had developed farming methods that had turned desert worlds into gardens. They had created soil treatments that made barren planets bloom with life. The farmers on these worlds had learned to follow human procedures, but they had never understood the science behind them. They had planted crops in the patterns that humans had taught them and used fertilizers that humans had developed, but they did not know why these methods worked. As the soil became exhausted and the crops failed, entire planets were facing starvation. The food distribution networks that had prevented famine were breaking down just when they were needed most. Billions of people were going hungry and no one knew how to feed them. The council chambers had become a place of constant crisis and growing anger. Representatives from dozens of species gathered every day to argue about problems that no one could solve. The emergency sessions had become the new normal. Species that had been allies for centuries were now enemies. The Altarians blamed the Zephyrians for hoarding medical supplies. The Mechanic Guild accused the Trade Federation of hiding human technology. The trust that had held the galactic community together was completely gone. The younger species were panicking as they realized that their entire way of life had been built on human foundations. The older species were angry as they discovered that their proud civilizations had become dependent on a species they had considered inferior. Ambassador Kira found herself in the middle of every argument as species after species demanded answers that she did not have. The investigation into human disappearance had found nothing but empty colonies and abandoned facilities. The humans had left behind their buildings and their equipment, but they had taken their knowledge with them. The galaxy was like a child who had been left alone with toys they did not understand. The adults were gone and everything was breaking. The economic reports showed that galactic civilization was heading toward complete collapse. The manufacturing systems were failing. The trade routes were chaotic. The food supplies were running out, and the medical systems were overwhelmed. The AI networks that had managed so much of galactic infrastructure were continuing to shut down one by one. Each system that went offline made life more difficult for everyone. The transportation networks that connected different worlds were becoming unreliable. Environmental controls that kept space stations livable were starting to malfunction. The communication systems that allowed different species to talk to each other were breaking down. The galaxy was becoming disconnected and dangerous. The violence was spreading as desperate species fought over the remaining resources. Wars that had been prevented by human diplomacy were now raging across multiple star systems. The peacekeeping forces that had maintained stability were overwhelmed. The council was powerless to stop the chaos. Their traditional methods of maintaining order through threats and punishment were making the situation worse. The species that had once respected council authority now saw it as ineffective and corrupt. Ambassador Kira realized that the galaxy was not just missing the humans, it was missing the very idea of cooperation and mutual support that humans had represented. The humans had not just solved problems, they had taught other species how to work together. Now, without human example, the galaxy was reverting to its old ways of competition and conflict. The civilizations that had learned to help each other were becoming enemies again. The unity that had made galactic civilization possible was disappearing. The domino effect was unstoppable. Each failure led to more failures. Each crisis created new crises. The galaxy was learning that removing humans had been like removing the glue that held everything together, and still no one knew where the humans had gone or why they had left. The mystery of their disappearance was becoming less important than the reality of their absence. The galaxy was dying without them, and no one knew how to save it. 18 months after the humans vanished, the Galactic Council made a decision that shocked everyone. They authorized the largest search operation in galactic history. Every spacefaring species would contribute ships and resources to find the missing humans. The search would cover every corner of the galaxy. The decision came after the Council realized that their civilization was dying without human help. The economic collapse was accelerating, the medical crisis was killing millions, and the social breakdown was threatening to tear apart everything they had built. Council leader Vex announced the massive search operation during an emergency session that was broadcast to every world in the galaxy. "We will find the humans," he declared, his four arms gesturing dramatically. "We will bring them back, and we will restore order to our galaxy." The search fleet was enormous, hundreds of ships from dozens of species launched simultaneously to scour every star system that had ever been explored. They followed every possible lead, investigated every unexplored region, and sent probes to the furthest reaches of known space. The Vexian Empire contributed their fastest scout ships, even though their fleet was falling apart. The Zephians provided their most advanced sensor technology, even though their economy was collapsing. The Altarians sent their best scientists, even though their people were dying from plague. Every species put aside their conflicts and worked together. For the first time in years, the search for humans became the one thing that united the galaxy. Even as everything else was falling apart, the search teams made discoveries that were both hopeful and terrifying. They found human colonies that had been abandoned, but not destroyed. The buildings were intact, the power systems were still running, but there were no humans anywhere to be found on the mining world of Kepler 438b. The search team found a human settlement that looked like its residents had simply vanished in the middle of their daily activities. Coffee cups were still sitting on tables, half-finished meals were still on plates, and personal belongings were scattered around, as if people had been interrupted while packing. But the most disturbing discovery was how organized the abandonment had been. The humans had not fled in panic or left in a hurry. They had methodically prepared for their departure, taken only what they needed and leaving everything else behind in perfect order. The search teams found similar scenes on dozens of worlds. Human research stations had been abandoned, but all the equipment was still functioning. The computers were still running their programs, but the data cores had been completely wiped clean. Human factories had been shut down properly, with all the machinery protected and maintained. The workers had even left detailed instructions for anyone who might want to restart production, but they had taken all the technical knowledge with them. The breakthrough came from Commander Hyjin's personal ship, the Aurora Dream. The ship was found drifting in an asteroid field near the edge of the galaxy. The vessel was intact with life support still functioning, but it was completely empty of crew. The ship's logs showed normal operations until the final entry, which was made by Commander Hyjin herself. The Council has made its position clear. She had recorded, "We are tolerated, not welcomed. It is time to go home." The navigation computer had been wiped clean, but the ship's AI had one final message for anyone who found it. "The stars are beautiful, but home is where the heart chooses to be. We have chosen to go home." The search teams were puzzled by these messages. What did the humans mean by going home? Earth was still there, still orbiting its yellow star, but it was as empty as every other human world. The planet showed no signs of recent habitation. The answer came from an unexpected source. Su Jin had been a human archaeologist who studied ancient ruins on distant worlds. She had been working on Proxima Centauri when she disappeared with all the other humans. The search team that investigated her abandoned research station found something that changed everything. Hidden in her final report, using an ancient human coding system, was a message that took weeks to decode for those who wished to understand. Look beyond the edge of all things. The message included coordinates to a location that was not just outside the galaxy, but beyond the outer rim where no stars existed. The coordinates pointed to a region of space that was completely empty according to all galactic maps. It was a void between galaxies where nothing was supposed to exist. The search teams had never looked there because it seemed impossible that anyone could survive in such emptiness. The Council debated for weeks about whether to send a ship to investigate the coordinates. The journey would take months, and the ship would be traveling into unknown space with no guarantee of finding anything. But the galaxy was dying without the humans, and the search operation was running out of places to look. The Council decided to send their fastest ship, the Endeavor, crewed by volunteers from every member species. The journey to the coordinates was long and dangerous. The ship traveled through regions of space where no one had ever been before. The crew watched as the familiar stars of their galaxy grew smaller and smaller behind them. When they finally reached the coordinates, they found something that no one had expected. A massive space station was orbiting a rogue planet in the void between galaxies. The station was clearly of human construction, but it was unlike anything they had ever seen. The station was not just advanced, it was evolved. The technology was so far beyond anything in the galaxy that it seemed almost magical. The ship sensors could barely comprehend what they were detecting. The station responded to their communications with a familiar voice. It was Jinho the human AI researcher who had vanished with all the others, but his voice sounded different somehow, more substantial and real than any human voice they had ever heard. "You have come looking for us," Jinho said, his image appearing on their communication screen. "You have traveled very far to find us. The question is, are you ready to hear why we left?" The search team was stunned to see Jinho, but he looked different than they remembered. He appeared older, but also somehow more complete, as if he had become more than just human during his absence. "We know that our galaxy is suffering," Jinho continued. "We know that our departure has caused great pain and hardship, but we also know that this was necessary for reasons you do not yet understand." The station agreed to allow a small delegation to come aboard. The search team selected Ambassador Kira and representatives from each major species to meet with Jinho and learn the truth about human disappearance. As their shuttle approached the station, they could see that it was massive beyond imagination. The structure seemed to extend in directions that their minds could not fully comprehend. It was as if the humans had built something that existed in more dimensions than normal space. The docking bay that received them was filled with technology that defied understanding. The walls seemed to be made of living light that responded to their presence. The air itself felt different, as if it contained more possibilities than regular atmosphere. Jinho met them at the airlock, and he was definitely not the same human they had known. He looked solid and real, but also somehow more than physical, as if he existed on multiple levels of reality at the same time. "Welcome to our new home," he said with a smile that contained both sadness and hope. "We have much to show you and much to explain. The journey you have taken to find us is nothing compared to the journey we have taken to become what we are now." The search was over, but the real discovery was just beginning. The humans had not just disappeared, they had transformed into something new, and the galaxy would never be the same. The truth was more shocking than anything the galactic delegates had imagined. Jinho led them through corridors that seemed to bend reality itself. The walls showed images of distant galaxies and dimensions that existed beyond normal space. The humans had not just left, they had evolved into something completely new. "We realized something that your species never understood," Jinho explained as they walked through the impossible station. "Intelligence is not about building bigger weapons or controlling more territory. It is about growth, adaptation, and eventually transcendence." The delegation followed Jinho into a vast chamber that contained what looked like a living universe. Stars and planets swirled in patterns that created music. Only the mind could hear. The technology around them was not just advanced, it was alive. "While you built empires and fought wars over resources, we built something different," Jinho continued. "We built a path beyond the limitations of physical existence. We learned to become more than the sum of our parts." Ambassador Kira felt dizzy as she tried to understand what she was seeing. The humans had always seemed so ordinary, so limited by their short lives and fragile bodies, but somehow they had achieved something that the oldest species in the galaxy had never imagined. The space station was revealed to be more than just a research facility. It was a doorway to higher dimensions where consciousness could exist without the need for physical bodies. The humans had discovered how to transfer their minds into pure energy while keeping their individual personalities intact. "We did not abandon the galaxy out of anger or spite," Jinho said, his voice carrying emotions that seemed to echo from multiple dimensions. "We left because we realized we were accidentally holding everyone back." The revelation hit the alien delegates like a physical blow. They had always thought of humans as the younger species, the ones who needed guidance and protection from the older, more established civilizations, but the truth was exactly opposite. The humans had been the most advanced species in the galaxy, and they had been hiding their true capabilities to avoid frightening the others. They had pretended to be primitive while secretly working on technologies that surpassed anything else in known space. "As long as we were there to solve every problem, to fix every crisis, to mediate every conflict, you would never learn to do it yourselves," Jinho explained. "We were accidentally creating a galaxy of children who never learned to grow up." The delegates began to understand the scope of what had happened. Every time the humans had helped solve a problem, they had prevented other species from developing their own solutions. Every time they had prevented a war, they had stopped other species from learning how to make peace. The humans had been like parents taking care of children, but they had realized that the children would never become adults as long as the parents were always there to help them. We studied your species for centuries, Jinho continued. We watched as you became more and more dependent on human solutions to your problems. We saw that our presence was preventing your growth. The chamber around them began to show images of the galaxy over the past few centuries. The delegates could see how human influence had slowly spread to every aspect of galactic civilization. The humans had not conquered through force or dominated through fear. They had simply been so helpful, so efficient, so good at solving problems that everyone had come to depend on them without realizing it. Your species all have incredible potential, Jinho said, but you stopped developing that potential because humans were always there to do the work for you. We realized that our greatest gift to the galaxy would be to remove ourselves. The delegates protested that the human departure had caused suffering and death across the galaxy. Millions of beings had died from diseases that human doctors could have cured. Wars had started that human diplomats could have prevented, but Jinho's expression grew sad as he responded, growth is painful, evolution requires struggle. We left behind everything you need to solve these problems, the knowledge, the tools, the examples, but you have to choose to use them. The humans had not just disappeared, they had left behind complete instructions for every technology they had developed. The cure for every disease they had been treating was hidden in their abandoned research facilities. The diplomatic techniques that had prevented wars were documented in detail in human archives. The manufacturing processes that had kept the galaxy supplied with goods were fully explained in technical manuals. Even the AI systems that had shut down had left behind complete blueprints for building new ones. The humans had given the galaxy every tool it needed to survive and thrive. Without them, you have to choose to grow, Jinho said. You have to choose to work together. You have to choose to become the adults we always knew you could be. Humans had not just evolved beyond physical existence. They had become something that could observe and guide without interfering. They could watch the galaxy develop and only help when absolutely necessary. We exist now in dimensions that your science cannot yet measure, Jinho explained. We can see the flow of time and possibility in ways that physical beings cannot understand. We know that the galaxy will survive this crisis and emerge stronger. The delegation realized that the humans had made the ultimate sacrifice. They had given up their physical existence and their place in galactic society to force other species to reach their true potential. The humans had become cosmic gardeners who had removed themselves from the garden so that the other plants could grow in their own light, instead of always living in human shadow. But the most amazing revelation was still to come. The humans had not just discovered how to transcend physical existence. They had left behind the complete research and technology for other species to follow the same path. We are not the only ones who can make this journey, Jinho said. The pathway to transcendence is open to any species that chooses to walk it. We have left the instructions hidden throughout the galaxy. The delegates realized that the humans had not just abandoned them, they had offered them the opportunity to evolve into something greater than they had ever imagined. The choice was theirs to make. They could try to rebuild their old galaxy using human technology, or they could choose to grow and develop their own solutions. They could remain dependent on human innovations, or they could learn to transcend their limitations. The humans had given them the ultimate gift, the chance to become equal partners in a universe that was far larger and more wonderful than they had ever dreamed. As the delegation prepared to return to their galaxy, they carried with them the knowledge that would change everything. The humans had not left them behind. They had gone ahead to prepare the way for everyone else to follow. The galaxy would never be the same, but perhaps that was exactly what it needed to become something truly great. The alien delegates returned to the Galactic Council with news that shattered every assumption about intelligent civilization and the nature of existence itself. The humans had not just disappeared, they had evolved into beings of pure consciousness who could exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The council chambers erupted in chaos as species after species tried to understand what this meant for their future. Some representatives refused to believe the report, others demanded proof that the humans had really achieved transcendence, but the evidence was overwhelming. The delegates had brought back recordings of their conversation with Jinho and sensor data from the impossible space station. The humans had clearly achieved something that no other species had ever imagined possible. The revelation that humans had been secretly the most advanced species in the galaxy shocked everyone. The proud civilizations that had considered themselves superior to the young human race were learning that they had been children playing with toys while the adults watched quietly. More disturbing was the realization that human departure had been a deliberate choice, designed to force other species to grow up. The suffering and chaos of the past 80 months had been the price of independence, but the humans had not left the galaxy to die. They had hidden detailed instructions for every technology they had developed in secret locations. Across human space, the search teams began finding these hidden facilities and the knowledge they contained. On the abandoned research station where Dr. Nari had worked, the search team found complete documentation of her plague research. The cure that could save millions of Altarian lives was there, along with treatments for dozens of other diseases. The manufacturing facilities that had shut down contained detailed repair manuals and improvement plans that would make them more efficient than ever before. The humans had not just left instructions, they had left upgrades. The diplomatic archives contained complete records of every conflict resolution technique that human peacekeepers had used. The methods that had prevented wars were documented step by step, ready for other species to learn and use. Most importantly, the humans had left behind their greatest discovery, the complete research on consciousness transfer and dimensional transcendence, the technology that would allow other species to follow the same evolutionary path was hidden in secure facilities across the galaxy. The Council faced a choice that would determine the future of galactic civilization. They could try to use human technology to rebuild their old way of life, or they could choose to grow beyond their limitations and become something new. The debate that followed was the most intense in Council history. The older species wanted to maintain the status quo. They argued that galactic civilization had worked fine before humans arrived, and it could work fine again with human technology. The younger species pushed for change. They had grown up with human influence, and they understood that the old ways of competition and conflict would not work in a galaxy that was becoming more connected every day. The vote was scheduled for the end of the month, but events in the galaxy were moving faster than the Council could keep up with. The crises that had started with human departure were reaching a breaking point. The Altarian plague was spreading to other worlds and threatening to become a galactic pandemic. The wars that had started in human absence were drawing in more species and threatening to tear apart the fragile peace. The manufacturing systems were failing faster than they could be repaired, and entire planets were running out of basic supplies. The AI networks that managed galactic infrastructure were shutting down at an accelerating rate. Ambassador Kira realized that the Council was running out of time. A galaxy could not wait for politicians to make decisions while people were dying and civilizations were collapsing. She made a decision that surprised everyone. Instead of waiting for the official vote, she announced that the Vexian Empire would immediately begin implementing the human solutions they had discovered. The Vexian medical corps would use Dr. Nari research to develop treatments for the plague. The Vexian engineers would use human technical manuals to restart the failing manufacturing systems. Other species quickly followed the Vexian example. The Zephyrians opened their secret archives to share human diplomatic techniques with anyone who needed them. The Mechanic Guild began teaching human engineering methods to repair crews across the galaxy. The Altarians, despite their suffering from the plague, contributed their scientific expertise to help develop new medical treatments. The Trade Federation reorganized their shipping routes, using human logistics principles for the first time in centuries. The species of the galaxy began working together not because they were forced to, but because they chose to. The crisis had taught them that cooperation was more powerful than competition. The results were immediate and dramatic. The plague that had been spreading uncontrolled was stopped within weeks as alien doctors learned to apply human medical techniques. The manufacturing systems that had been failing came back online with improved efficiency. The AI networks that had been shutting down were replaced with new systems that incorporated human partnership principles instead of trying to control artificial minds. The species learned to work with them as equals. The wars that had been raging across multiple star systems ended as diplomats. Trained in human conflict resolution techniques found peaceful solutions that satisfied everyone involved. The galaxy began to stabilize, but more importantly, it began to grow. The species that had been stagnant for centuries started developing new technologies and new ways of thinking about old problems. The younger species, who had been dismissed by their elders, suddenly found their voices heard and their ideas valued. The older species, who had been set in their ways, discovered that change could be exciting rather than frightening. The cultural exchange that had been dying with human departure came back stronger than ever as different species shared their knowledge and creativity. The galaxy became more diverse and more unified at the same time, but the most remarkable change was in how the species viewed themselves and each other. The competitive mindset that had dominated galactic politics for millennia was replaced by a cooperative approach that valued everyone's contributions. The final council vote was unanimous. The galaxy would not try to rebuild the old system. They would embrace the human example and work together to build something better. Ambassador Kira cast the deciding vote that made it official. The humans were right. She said, "We have been children playing with adult toys. It is time to grow up." The transformation was not easy. There were setbacks and failures as species learned to work together in new ways, but the progress was steady and the results were remarkable. The galaxy that emerged from the crisis was stronger, more resilient, and more creative than the one that had existed before. The species had learned to solve their own problems, to prevent their own conflicts, and to create their own solutions. And in the void between galaxies, the transcended humans watched with pride as their former neighbors took their first steps toward a future they would build themselves. The humans had made the ultimate sacrifice, giving up their physical existence to force the galaxy to grow beyond its limitations. The cost had been enormous, but the results were even greater. The galaxy had faced the cost of human departure, and in paying that price had discovered something invaluable: their own potential for greatness. Jinho and his fellow transcended humans knew that their work was not finished. The galaxy would face new challenges and new opportunities in the years ahead. But they also knew that the species they had left behind were now capable of handling whatever came their way. The age of dependence was over. The age of true galactic civilization had begun. The humans had taught the galaxy the greatest lesson of all, that sometimes the best way to help someone is to step back and let them help themselves. The galaxy would never forget the humans who had sacrificed everything to give them the chance to become great. But more importantly, the galaxy would never again need to depend on anyone else to solve their problems. They had learned to stand on their own, and in doing so had become worthy of the friendship and guidance that the transcended humans would always be ready to provide. When truly needed, the future was bright, and it belonged to all of them together.